My family owns a small, secluded winter cabin near a frozen lake in northern Minnesota. My parents, avid cross-country skiers, bought it years ago as a weekend getaway. The cabin is modest, a single-story wooden structure with peeling paint and drafty windows. It's surrounded by towering pine trees, their branches heavy with snow in winter. We've had the place for as long as I can remember, but the older it gets, the more eerie it feels. This story takes place when I was 10 and my older sister Lily was 13. It was Christmas break, and our family had decided to spend a few days at the cabin to unplug from the world. That meant no internet, no TV, and as my parents loved to say, just good old-fashioned family time. The snowstorm hit on the second day. By late afternoon, the wind howled through the trees and thick snow blanketed everything in sight. The sky was a dull gray, and the temperature had dropped to a bone-chilling -10 degrees Fahrenheit. The frozen lake behind the cabin was almost entirely hidden under layers of snow, with only a faint, uneven path leading down to it. Lily and I were bored out of our minds. With nothing else to do, we decided to play outside. Bundled up in layers of winter gear, we trudged through the snow, laughing as we threw snowballs and pushed each other into snowdrifts. Eventually, we came up with a game: hide and seek around the cabin and along the edge of the frozen lake. The rules were simple: no hiding too far into the woods, no going out onto the ice, and no hiding inside the cabin. I was it first, so Lily ran off to hide while I counted to 50 under the porch. When I finished, I started searching, calling out her name and checking all her usual spots. After a few minutes, I found her crouched behind a fallen log near the tree line. She groaned dramatically when I tagged her, and we switched roles. "Okay, my turn," I said, already plotting where to hide. "Make it good." Lily yelled as she turned her back and started counting loudly. I glanced around, looking for the perfect spot. My eyes landed on an old fishing shack near the edge of the lake, about 200 feet from the cabin. It was barely more than a wooden box with a rusted metal roof, but it was just big enough to crouch inside. Excited, I sprinted through the snow toward it, my boots crunching loudly with every step. When I reached the shack, I realized how dilapidated it was. The door was hanging off one hinge and the windows were cracked and fogged over. Still, it was better than hiding behind another log. I ducked inside, my breath visible in the frigid air. The interior smelled like damp wood and mildew. It was dark, save for a small crack in the roof that let in a sliver of pale light. I crouched in the corner, listening to the muffled sound of the wind outside. Minutes passed. I waited, expecting to hear Lily calling out for me or her boots crunching through the snow as she got closer. But there was nothing, just the eerie silence of the storm. Then I heard it. A soft crunching sound, faint but distinct, coming from the direction of the cabin. I held my breath, straining to hear over the howling wind. The crunching grew louder, more deliberate, like footsteps moving slowly through the snow. "Lily," I called out hesitantly. No response. The footsteps stopped. The shack suddenly felt much smaller, the air colder. I peeked through a crack in the wooden wall, expecting to see my sister playing a trick on me. Instead, I saw a figure. It was tall, dressed in heavy winter gear, an oversized parka with fur-lined boots and a dark hood that obscured their face. They were standing just a few feet from the shack, their head tilted slightly, as if they were listening for something. My stomach dropped. "Lily," I called again, louder this time. The figure turned toward the sound of my voice. Even though I couldn't see their face, I could feel their gaze. It was like being pinned under a spotlight, every instinct in my body screaming at me to run. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding, and bolted out of the shack. The snow was deeper than I remembered, and my boots sank with every step. I didn't dare look back. "Lily," I screamed, my voice cracking with panic. I reached the cabin, bursting through the door and slamming it behind me. My parents looked up from the kitchen table startled. "What's wrong?" my mom asked, standing up. "Where's Lily?" I panted, barely able to get the words out. "She hasn't come back yet," my dad asked, frowning. Before I could answer, the front door opened, and Lily walked in, brushing snow off her jacket. "What's your problem?" she asked, glaring at me. "Why'd you stop playing?" I stared at her, my mind racing. "I thought you were outside," I stammered. "I was," she said, confused. "I came back to check if you were still hiding, but you weren't there." I opened my mouth to explain, but before I could, we all froze. There was a knock at the door, 3 slow, deliberate knocks. My dad, visibly on edge, grabbed a flashlight and went to the door. He opened it cautiously, but there was no one there. just a set of footprints leading away from the cabin, disappearing into the woods. "What the hell?" he muttered, stepping outside to look around. When he came back in, he locked the door and pulled the curtains shut. "Everyone stay inside," he said firmly. We didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind set us on edge. My dad kept watch by the window, a hunting rifle by his side, but nothing else happened. The next morning, we followed the footprints, curious about where they led. They ended abruptly at the edge of the frozen lake, as if whoever had made them had simply vanished. We left that afternoon, cutting the trip short. To this day, I don't know who or what was out there, but every time I think about that figure outside the shack, I get chills, remembering the way it seemed to stare right through me. Last year, my family and I lived in a cozy suburban neighborhood, renting a 2-story house that had seen better days. My wife Amanda and I had been saving to buy our dream home, but for now, this house worked well enough for us and our 3 kids. 12-year-old Lucan, 8-year-old Mia, and 5-year-old Ella. Life was busy but good, and our routines were down to a science. December rolled in with a vengeance that year, bringing one of the worst snowstorms I'd ever seen. The roads were treacherous, schools were closed, and my office gave us the option to work remotely. Amanda, a teacher, was home too since her school had canceled classes. The kids were ecstatic about staying home, while Amanda and I braced ourselves for what was sure to be a chaotic week. I turned the guest bedroom into my home office, setting up my laptop on the old desk and enjoying the relative quiet, while Amanda kept the kids entertained downstairs. The storm was relentless, with heavy snow pounding against the windows and wind howling through the cracks in the doors. By mid-afternoon, I was knee-deep in work emails when a sharp knock at the front door interrupted me. I peeked out of the room to hear Amanda call out, "Honey, can you get that? I'm trying to keep Ella from painting the walls again." Chuckling to myself, I headed downstairs. At the door, I saw a man standing on the porch, bundled up in a heavy winter coat. He was shivering, his face red from the cold. I opened the door slightly, letting a gust of icy wind rush into the house. "Hi, can I help you?" I asked, keeping my tone polite but guarded. The man gave me an apologetic smile. "Sorry to bother you. My car's stuck in the snow just down the street, and I don't have my phone with me. I was wondering if I could borrow yours to call my brother for help." I glanced back at Amanda, who was now holding Ella on her hip while Mia peeked around the corner, curious. Lucan was nowhere to be seen, probably upstairs playing video games. I hesitated. Something about the man seemed off, but it was hard to tell if it was just the situation or my paranoia. "Give me a minute," I said, closing the door partway. "Who's that?" Amanda asked as I walked toward the window. "Some guy says his car's stuck. Wants to borrow my phone," I replied, peering outside. Sure enough, there was a small SUV half buried in snow at the curb. Amanda frowned. "Be careful." "Weirdly, he's out here alone in this weather." "I know." I grabbed my coat and slipped on my boots before heading back to the door. Stepping outside, I handed the man my phone but stayed close, watching him carefully as he made a quick call. He thanked me, handed the phone back, and trudged off toward his car. For the rest of the afternoon, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. When I glanced out the window later, I saw that his car was still there, and he was sitting inside, his figure barely visible through the frosted windows. At dinner, the kids were full of questions. "Who was that guy?" Dad Lucan asked between bites of spaghetti. "Just someone who needed help," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "Is he still out there?" Mia chimed in, her big brown eyes wide with curiosity. I nodded. "Looks like it. He's probably waiting for his brother to show up." Amanda shot me a worried glance but didn't say anything. By 9:30, the kids were tucked into bed and Amanda was upstairs reading. I decided to take a quick shower before calling it a night. The hot water was a relief after the cold day, and I let myself relax for a few minutes, until the banging started. It was loud, deafening. Someone was pounding on the front door with such force that it made the walls shake. I froze, my heart racing as the sound reverberated through the house. "Matt!" Amanda's voice called from upstairs, filled with panic. I turned off the water, threw on some clothes, and rushed out of the bathroom. Amanda was standing at the top of the stairs, holding Ella, who was crying. Lucan and Mia were peeking out of their rooms, their faces pale. "What's going on?" Amanda asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I said, moving cautiously down the stairs. The banging had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. When I reached the door, I hesitated. Through the peephole, I saw nothing but darkness. I opened the door slightly, just enough to peek outside. The porch was empty. The man's car was still there, but he was gone. Amanda joined me at the window, clutching Ella tightly. "Where is he?" she whispered. "I don't know," I said, feeling a knot of fear tighten in my chest. Suddenly, Lucan's voice called out from upstairs. "Dad! Someone's in the backyard!" I bolted up the stairs and into his room, where he was standing by the window, pointing. In the dim glow of the porch light, I saw a figure moving through the snow, heading toward the back of the house. Grabbing my phone, I called the police. "There's someone on my property," I told the dispatcher, trying to keep my voice steady. The officers arrived about 20 minutes later, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they searched the property. They found several sets of footprints leading around the house, but the fresh snow had obscured most of the details. The car was registered to a man who matched the description of the stranger I'd helped earlier, but the police couldn't find any trace of him, or anyone else. For weeks after, I couldn't stop thinking about that night. Who was that man? Why had he come back, and who else had been with him? The kids eventually stopped asking questions, but Amanda and I were left with an unsettling sense of vulnerability. The mystery of that snowy December night remains unsolved, and sometimes when the wind howls against the house, I can't help but wonder if he, or they, will ever come back. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a black void punctuated only by the faint outline of distant mesas and the occasional cluster of scraggly bushes. I was driving home from a business trip late at night, speeding down an isolated highway that seemed carved out of nowhere. The air outside was thick with heat that refused to dissipate even after sunset, and the stars above were cold and indifferent. The radio had long since given up picking up any stations, so it was just me, the hum of my engine, and the rhythmic slap of my tires against the cracked asphalt. I checked the dashboard. The fuel gauge was fine, but the temperature needle was hovering dangerously close to red. I should have gotten it fixed weeks ago, but I'd kept putting it off. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, I felt small, vulnerable. About an hour into the drive, my car jolted violently to the side, and a loud pop cut through the monotony. I cursed under my breath and pulled over, gravel crunching under my tires as I came to a stop on the shoulder. I flicked on my hazard lights and stepped out, the desert air hitting me like a wall. The silence was oppressive. No wind, no chirping insects, just an unnatural stillness that seemed to press against my ears. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove box and circled the car, shining it over the flat rear tire. "Great," I muttered, kicking the useless rubber. I opened the trunk to grab the spare when I heard it, a faint, low hum. It was so soft that I wasn't sure I'd heard anything at first, but then it came again, carried on the still air like a ghostly melody. Someone was humming. I froze, flashlight gripped tight in my hand, and scanned the horizon. There was nothing but empty desert and the faint shimmer of heat waves rising off the ground. "Hello," I called out, my voice unnaturally loud in the silence. The humming stopped. I waited, every muscle in my body tense. The only sound was the faint creak of my car cooling in the night air. Shaking my head, I told myself it was just my imagination and got to work on the tire. But as I loosened the lug nuts, I caught movement in my peripheral vision, a shadow shifting in the distance. My flashlight beam jerked toward it, landing on an old, battered RV parked at an angle about 50 yards off the road. It hadn't been there before. The windows were dark, and the whole thing looked like it had been abandoned for years, but something about it made my skin crawl. I stared at it, half expecting someone to step out, but nothing happened. Then the humming started again. It was louder this time, closer, and it wasn't coming from the RV. It was coming from the darkness just beyond the reach of my flashlight. I stood up, clutching the tire iron like a weapon. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice trembling, no answer. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. A man, tall and thin, with a face that seemed unnaturally pale under the flashlight beam. He was grinning, but it wasn't a friendly grin. It was the kind of smile that showed too many teeth, like he was trying too hard to look human. "Car trouble?" he asked, his voice low and raspy. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. "Yeah, I've got it handled." The man tilted his head, his grin widening. Out here all alone, that's dangerous. Before I could respond, he raised his hand and pointed behind me. You've got company. I whipped around, the flashlight beam sweeping across the empty road. Nothing. When I turned back, the man was gone. The humming returned, louder than ever, and now it was coming from all around me, if the desert itself was singing. Panic set in. I jumped into the car and locked the doors, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys. The engine sputtered to life, and I peeled out onto the road, leaving the RV and the grinning man behind. But as I drove, the humming followed me. It was faint at first, just a whisper at the edge of hearing, but it grew louder and louder, filling the car like a sinister choir. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw headlights. My stomach dropped. The RV was back, barreling down the road toward me, its headlights blazing like twin suns. It closed the distance alarmingly fast, swerving wildly as if the driver was drunk or insane. I floored the gas pedal, but my car was old and sluggish, and the RV easily caught up, riding my bumper so close I could see the outline of the driver in the mirror. It was the same man, his face twisted into that awful grin. He swerved to the side, pulling up next to me, and for a moment, we were driving side by side. He rolled down his window and I saw his mouth moving. He was humming. I couldn't take it anymore. I slammed on the brakes, letting the RV shoot past me, and made a U-turn, speeding back the way I came. My hands were slick with sweat, and my heart felt like it was about to explode. When I reached a gas station about 10 miles down the road, I practically stumbled inside, gasping for breath. The clerk, a grizzled old man with a cigarette dangling from his lips, looked up from his magazine. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, chuckling. I told him what had happened, but he just shook his head. "Ain't nobody out there this time of night. You must have imagined it." I called the police, and they came out to investigate. We drove back to the spot where I'd seen the RV, but it was gone. No tire tracks, no sign of the man, nothing. The cops told me it was probably a prank or a trick of the light, but I knew better. That man, that RV, the humming, they were real. Sometimes late at night I still hear it. That low, haunting melody drifts through the darkness like a warning. I've stopped driving through the desert, but deep down I know it doesn't matter. They'll find me again. It's only a matter of time.